when you're running for Congress and you're talking to people who don't work in tech, and they hear data and they're like, well, what is that like? Is that like the speed of my internet connection? Like, why are you talking to me about this?
Right.
You know, how do you make it relatable to people who don't think about this stuff all the time?
You have to brand, you have to take it to something that they care about more, right? Like I was on another podcast and people were talking to me about, and we were just tweeting about the other day about pharmaceutical data and the subsidies that pharmaceutical companies get and how poorly they're treating employees across different industries. And it's really about storytelling. So I normally tell a story in that space about a woman named Henrietta Lacks. And for anyone who's not familiar, Google Henrietta Lacks. And there's a book about her called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. She was a woman who died of cervical cancer back in the 50s. They kept her cancerous cells. She was in her early 30s. And they commodified them and used them in academia. And her cell set served as the seminal research base for every disease that we've cured over the course of the past 60 years. Polio, that was her. The human genome mapping, that was her. She created $1 trillion industry based on her tissue sample, and her family didn't get a dime for it. And when I talk to people about data, I don't have to actually talk about data because data is everything. Data is not the new oil. Neither is technology. Data is the new matter, and it is everything that matters. We will put a data point on every moving particle and measure everything in the world, period. And as we do that, we will start to validate our diversity in such a narrow way that all that will become valuable is evidence of our existence, period. And so when I stump and I talk to people about the universal basic income that they're owed, I'm never really talking about data. I'm talking about the idea that everyone feels like they're due more from this economy. The people working 2 or 3 jobs who are still dead broke, they're like, I need something more. The people who make 100K in New York, who can't afford to really live in New York, because that is no money in New York. A beer is $9, you know. They feel like they're due more. And so the political conversation is back to the basics. You are valuable and you are due more. And what are you willing to do to demand the more that you're owed? And so, you know, we've branded our campaign on having a conversation around what we owe us because it sounds like hip hop, and hip hop is bigger than politics.
Let me ask you, let me play devil's advocate with you about Henrietta.
Sure.
So if I worked for one of the big pharma companies, I could say, well, you know what? She was compensated for participating in some study. She signed this document which says anything that she does or gives us will be ours forever and ever. She didn't have to do that. If she didn't do it, we would have found someone else who did. Like, why do we have to give her like half of all of our profits?
Sure. So here would be my answer. Here would be a good lawyer's answer, which I am not, but I think engineers are better at lawyering than lawyers, because lawyers are trained at risk aversion and we're trained at problem solving. But per that, any contract where you are ignorantly engaged in that contract and you take a sort of take it or leave it fee, which by the way, which was not her case, right? They just took her sales and used them. But let's say she was knowledgeably in play. Let's say, for the sake of your argument, as devil's advocate, which by the way, devil's advocate would just be saying you submit your soul to the devil. This isn't necessarily advocating for the devil, but let's play on it. The idea here is it's called a contract of adhesion. So my work over the course of the past decade has been writing laws that give you a constitutional agency or constitutional ownership right over your evidence of your personhood, which we would call personal data. As you now have that constitutional ownership, you can make an argument around your ownership on in every contract of adhesion that you're locked into, whether it's with Instagram or it's with that pharmaceutical company, to say, look, I am not worth the entire market value of the productivity that has come from my cell and data mining, but I am entitled to a piece of that value. I'm not saying that Jeff Bezos isn't worth $50 million. I'm saying I know for a fact that he's not worth $150 billion. The rest of that money is ours, and we should be able to live and eat on it. And it's not just his company, and it's not just the pharmaceutical companies. It's every institution. If I invite you to the table of productivity, I want to be a bit philosophical and nerdy here, since your show is with the nerds.
Oh, this is the place to do it.
Yeah, this is the place. Let's tumble way down this rabbit hole. I am saying at the table of productivity that humans do not create value. They contribute it intrinsically. But groups of humans, institutions, even companies, you name it, they do create value, because at that table, even if I pay you a wage or a retainer for your time, which a wage is, you come to the table, we both participate a bit, we're exchanging ideas right here, and productivity will proliferate from it because people will gain knowledge from these communications. The question should be asked at the end, after it is productive, what of that productivity are you entitled to, and what am I entitled to? Now, if I take 99.9% of the value and I don't give you any, number one, it's ethically inept, but it's also economically inept. It's inefficient. And by us not spreading enough of the value that proliferates from our interaction, we actually stifle the economy, which is really saying we're stifling our ability to interact well, because you don't have enough to really play with me. And that's what's happening in the economy over and over and over again. And so my response would be, first off, Henriette is locked into a contract of adhesion. You owe her some more money. You don't owe her all of the money from that productivity, but you definitely owe her something. And we should have a legal fight around what that number is. And that number, I can tell you, at the very minimum, is $1,000 a month. Universal basic income does not end at $1,000 a month. That's the initial bonus that every non-working and working person gets that they could never negotiate. I've been in a bunch of executive roles, and I know, going company by company, that there are only a few of us who have the ability to negotiate a bonus on top of our wages. Most people, they don't. They're like, I'll come in for $15 an hour, whatever the minimum wage is, I'll do that. And that's fine. But everyone needs to, if they're a participant in a productive process, they need to be able to take an equity stake or dividend from that productive process. It's not only right economically, but it's right ethically, it's right morally. If we continue to scale productivity and lock people out of that productivity equation, we're going to have a lot of chaos on our hands. And I'll be right there with the people.